I will now hand over to our club secretary, Colleen Hoyt, who will introduce our guest speaker for this afternoon.
Okay, so good afternoon all. Today's guest speaker for this session is a qualified business professional with 30 years in recruitment and human resource management, coupled with 25 years as an entrepreneur and company director. She's none other than past district governor and avid Rotarian, Laura Quentrell-Thomas. Laura is the founder and chairman of Regency Recruitment Limited, where she develops corporate strategy, builds client relationships, negotiates contracts, and ensures the efficient and effective operations of the business within a supportive environment for all employees. She holds an MBA from Henley Business School and a degree in business management from the University of West England. Laura is actively engaged in several philanthropic ventures, such as AmCham, the Association of Female Executives, where she is both the founder and first president, the Trinidad and Tobago Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, and the Rotary Club of Central Port of Spain. In her current capacity as District 7030 District Grant Chair for 2020-2021, we welcome her presentation on an introduction to district and global grants, which we know will be engaging and filled with key takeaway points for our Rotaract clubs. Welcome, PDG Laura.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. Let me get to my screen. Okay. Can everybody see my screen? Yes, perfect. Okay, so my thanks to Rotaract for inviting me to spend a bit of time with you this afternoon. This is actually normally my nap time. Saturday at 2 o'clock, I'm normally having a little snooze. So you have to know how special you are that I was willing to give that up to talk to you about grants. And actually, as I know Giselle can attest, we've actually just finished our review and allocation of district grants for this Rotary year, and her club was one of the lucky ones to receive a district grant. So it's a great day to talk about grants because we had been able to share some good news with some of the clubs in our district. And interestingly enough, I've been involved with grants now probably 5 years or so, both as a Rotarian applying as well as on the district side, looking at applications, reviewing applications and the funding allocation and so on. And it's always astonishing to me how few clubs actually apply. And we've had this challenge over the years where we've done a great job in the last few years because we've really been pushing it and sharing information and so on. But for many years, clubs just didn't apply. And as Giselle will attest, there's money there to be had for projects that you want to do. So it's a really important mechanism for Rotary clubs to fund their work. So I'm excited to have the opportunity to share with you some thoughts on this. I will email the slides afterwards so that you can distribute them to your Rotaract and anybody else that's interested. And then I think we've agreed that we'll do questions at the end. So I'll ask somebody to just take a note of the questions, and then if there are any, I can address those at the end. So first of all, to say happy Halloween to everybody. Today is a very exciting day. I know I have 4 nephews, all of whom are trick-or-treat legends in their neighborhood, so I know they'll be preparing their costumes. But today is also a very sad day. We lost one of the most beautiful men in the history of men, and James Bond 007 died today. So it is in his memory that I present these slides to you. All right, so let's begin by setting the stage for where our grants come from and why it's an important part of our Rotary work. And of course, this is our Rotary Foundation. Okay, I know that you are probably all fairly familiar with the foundation, but I'm going to go over some of the basics just as a refresher in case you didn't know, and some new information for those who may not. So the mission of the Rotary Foundation is stated to enable Rotarians to advance world understanding and goodwill through the various programs and projects that we do, whether it's with health, education, and our sort of global statement is doing good in the world. So it's important to understand that the Rotary Foundation is different from Rotary International. It is, of course, a part of Rotary International, but it is a different arm, it is a different organizational structure. So the two entities are separate but connected. So Rotary Foundation is a charity, is simply a charity. It is a registered charity in the United States. And one of the great things about the Rotary Foundation is that 90% of funds raised and sent to the foundation actually go back out to programs. I'm sure some of you would have seen there's been a lot of news coverage, especially after the earthquake in Haiti, where of course NGOs and charities received a lot of funding from around the world, but exactly how much of that got to the people of Haiti, how much of that money actually went to projects in those communities. And there were some horrifying statistics where for some of the charities, for every dollar you gave, only 20 cents would get to the people. The rest would be spent for staff salaries, travel, housing, those sorts of things. So one of the great things about the Rotary Foundation is that it has been able to keep its operational costs very low, and therefore for every dollar that you give, 90 cents goes back to the community, back to the projects that we actually want to invest in. And so it is consistently recognized by Charity Navigator, which is a US rating agency for all of the different charities in the world, as a 4-star charity. So it's important to understand that, because as you go out and about and try and encourage people to support your projects, to support giving to the Rotary Foundation, even your Rotaractors, they need to feel confident that when you put money into the foundation, it actually is being spent where you would hope and want it to be spent. So over the last 100 years, and Rotary Foundation celebrated its centennial in Atlanta a couple of years ago, but in that time, more than $3 billion has been spent on life-changing projects. And one of the key things about Rotary Foundation work, as I said, not just that 90% goes to the projects, but that we really try and focus on sustainability. And that's become more and more important now, and it certainly is more and more important in our grants, as you will see as I go through the slides. But we really are looking for projects. Yes, there'll always be a need to give something now, as we've seen with COVID, to give food hampers. We've all been trying to give tablets to students who need to do online learning, those kinds of things. But when we think about Rotary projects and we think about projects that are supported by the foundation, the goal is really to always try and have work done in communities that is sustainable, that after Rotary has left the community, the people in that village, in that town, in that school, in that hospital, they can continue the work. So we've given them some building blocks on which they can then become economically viable or continue their healthcare delivery and so on. So sustainability is a key element of the work that we do at the Rotary Foundation. So let's have a look at the funding side of grants, because it's important to understand how the money gets in there and of course how it is then distributed. So we ask Rotarians on a regular basis, I'm sure your Rotaract Club does too, to give to the Rotary Foundation. And there are a number of ways that we can give, either as individuals or as clubs. And it's important to note as well that a lot of the giving to Rotary Foundation doesn't even require Rotarians to give. Individuals can give, companies can give. So there's lots of different ways that you can support the foundation. But the first is what we call the annual fund. And so just to give you an example, in my club, every year we have a commitment that we make to give money to the annual fund, because the annual fund is really what goes back out into projects across the world in the different areas of focus. Of course, you're familiar with those. So we make a commitment every year to give to the annual fund as a specific gift to that part of the Rotary Foundation. The Rotary Foundation has a number of different programs, one of which is the annual fund. And this is very much about, again, sustainable projects, whether it's clean water, whether it's education, mothers and children, and so on. So that can be a club gift. On an individual level, we in Rotary ask every Rotarian to give a little something every year. And many clubs, mine included, have begun to actually put this on our annual or semi-annual invoice for membership. So when you receive your invoice from the club, you will have your district dues, your RI dues, your club dues, and then we also add a line item for what we call ERA, every Rotarian every year. So this makes it easier for members to give, because they can just pay it with their annual, semi-annual invoice. Not everybody does, it's totally optional, but that's a way that we found to get more members to give. And the amount that you give, it doesn't matter, but it does, in the sense that we encourage people to give what they can, but of course, the more you can give, then the more work that we can do. So we typically benchmark ours at about 100 US a year, which is about 700 TT, just a bit below that. And we would split it in 2 halves, so it's not too difficult for members to give. So something to think about as you go forward, because I know Rotaract clubs are going to start to be applying for grants, to think about the money that you put into the foundation, because what's really important to understand about grants is that we can only get out from what we've put in. So you cannot have grants being given from an empty bank account. So we rely on the clubs in our district to give to the Rotary Foundation in order for us to then have funds to distribute in grants. This is not money that the Rotary Foundation is giving us from other clubs. This is money that we have put in, okay? So the E-Ray is one way that you as an individual Rotarian or Rotaractor can give. And then what happens is the money that is given to the foundation, as I mentioned, the annual fund, is actually then distributed back out to clubs through what they call the share system. So essentially what happens is half of the money that is being given, so let's say you gave $100 to the annual fund, $50 would go to the World Fund, which goes to the global grant side of our work, and then 50% is given back to the district in our district designated fund. So this is where we take our district grants from. So for every $100, $50 would go for global grants and $50 would come back to us in district grants. And to a certain extent, global grants, the governor does have some discretion there, but that's essentially how it is split. And we are eligible to access funding based on what was given 3 years ago. So it's done on a 3-year cycle. So in this Rotary year, we are 2020-2021, we are accessing funds that were given in the 2017-18 Rotary year. So depending on what clubs gave in that year, this is now the money that we have to share with our clubs as district grants. So it's important to understand that 3-year cycle, because obviously what Rotary does is a certain amount of that money is invested to try and grow it. Some of it, of course, goes out to global grants, and then we have access. So on a rolling basis, we're always taking from 3 years ago. There is also in the Rotary Foundation what's known as an endowment fund, and this is where the principal stays in the fund and they spend the interest. And this is really for individuals predominantly who can leave money to Rotary Foundation in their will. So you can write into your will that you wish to leave a legacy to the Rotary Foundation. Some people will give property or gifts, outright gifts of, you know, thousands of dollars. But the idea with the endowment fund is it's really a sort of legacy fund for Rotary Foundation. It's kind of in a way our rainy day fund. So the money is there, it is invested, but the actual original contribution is never touched. So it's a just in case, a bit like our heritage and stabilization fund. And one of the programs that the Rotary Foundation supports is what's called a vocational training team. Now, some of you may not remember, but we used to have a program in Rotary called GSE, which is Global Study Exchange. Is that right? Yeah, GSE. And I actually was fortunate enough in 2010 to take a GSE team from the Caribbean. We went to North Carolina and we spent a month, and it was an amazing experience. You live in the homes of Rotarians, and the idea is essentially a vocational exchange. So if I am a librarian, I would go to another country and I learn about the work of librarians in that country, with the idea then that I come back and I share the knowledge that I've gained, but also part of our peace building work, of course, to live and share bread and spend time with people in another culture, in another community, helps you build tolerance and understanding and all of those things. The GSE program was stopped and it has been replaced by what's called the VTT program. Some people are not happy with the new program, but it is what it is. And a VTT enables clubs and districts to create, it could be the GSE model, but it could be something very different. So I could take, for example, a team of nurses. If, let's say, there was some special COVID training that was available in Holland, and we wanted to sponsor 10 nurses from Trinidad to go to Holland for 2 weeks for this training, we could apply for a VTT grant for that. So the idea, again, it's a very similar, it's vocational, it's very much based around your profession, professional development, but the VTT enables you to bring together a group of like-minded, vocational, like-minded professionals, but the program could be a week, it could be a year, it's very flexible, unlike GSE, which was a 1-month program. So as far as I know, our district has not done a VTT grant yet, but it is available and something that I think we should definitely be looking into. But we've not done one, as far as I know, since this program started. So as you know, our foundation is guided by, well, actually now, of course, there are 7. My apologies for not updating the slide. What were our 6 areas of focus, and we now have 7, which is the environment. And so all of the projects that clubs do must fall under one of these 7 areas of focus. And that's important because these areas of focus it helps us keep a track of what is being done, but it's also aligned with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And if you look at the SDGs and you look at our areas of focus, you'll see that there are lots of shared areas. And this is all part of our commitment to global peace building, to global relationships. So the more alignment we have with organizations like the UN, the better it is even for you to go to sponsors and to partners and show how the work that you're doing as a Rotaract club is aligned to the SDGs or aligned to our areas of focus. So the environment, there was a lot of conversation and it was quite a hard-won battle to add the environment to the areas of focus. But, you know, as our planet continues to burn, we have no choice. So that is the 7th area of focus now. So everything you do in Rotaract and Rotary really should fall under one of the 7 areas. And you'll see as you start to apply for grants and do a bit more research that this is required. It's a mandatory part of your application for funding. So let's have a look at our grants. District grants. So district grants are managed by the district as opposed to being managed by Rotary Foundation. And they are typically smaller projects with short-term impact. Now, it doesn't mean that they cannot be sustainable or that they are not required to be sustainable, but they are generally more immediate need projects for much less money. So again, I need to update this to 7 areas of focus, but what happens is a number of clubs will apply for a district grant from their district grants chair, which is me. And then once we have reviewed and approved the clubs that we wish to give grants to, we have to apply to Rotary for the grants as a block. So let's say we decided to give 10 clubs $5,000 each. We would then apply to Rotary for $50,000 from our district designated fund. So we have to know what is in the fund to start with. If we don't have $50,000, of course, we can't apply for $50,000. So we would apply for up to the full amount of our district designated fund. Rotary then gives us the money as a lump sum, and we then distribute it to the clubs. So that's how the district grant is done. The Rotary Foundation basically trusts that the district team know the clubs, know the projects, know that they're worthy and so on. There's not a great deal of scrutiny in terms of how the projects are funded, where the funds go, except at the district level. So it's smaller amounts, typically for short-term projects, and it's administered by our district. And then we have global grants. So you remember that the $100 is split between the two sides, the World Fund and then the district fund. So this is the World Fund. So global grants are much bigger grants. These are programs that are much longer term. So this might be a long-term training program. It might be something that is going to be done over a period of 2 years or 3 years. What's important for global grants is that you do actually have to have an international partner. So a Rotary Club in Trinidad could decide to do a global grant, do a project here in Trinidad, but the application would require you to have an international partner. So it could be a Rotary Club in the US or in Europe, Australia, but it is important because these are essentially seen as the name suggests, global grants. So it's Rotary World coming together to do projects. These have to be sustainable. And the difference with these is that the Rotary Foundation manages them. So they are the ones who will require your reporting. They will send, they have volunteers who come and, well, now doing it virtually, but would come and assess the project to make sure that the funds are being spent how they're supposed to be spent. So let's say you're doing a project where you are building a well or a water tanks installation in some community, they may actually send somebody down to come and take pictures of the tanks to make sure that the money is being spent how it's supposed to be, because stewardship of funds is absolutely critical. And interestingly enough, global grants also we do not get many applications. And one of the reasons for this is that they are a little bit trickier to navigate. They do require a bit more administration. They do require proper stewardship rules. You know, one example is that ideally, to have a global grant, you should set up a separate bank account. Now, anybody who's ever tried that in Trinidad knows it's a complete nightmare. So, you know, there are some things, some of the bureaucracy that does put people off. But if you have a project, you have an international partner, and it's a big, long-term, big dollar value project, a global grant is, you know, an obvious route to at least explore. So the global grant started 2013, and there was a huge growth in the beginning. It has slowed down somewhat now. But of course, one of the big challenges this year has been COVID. So what the Rotary Foundation took a decision to actually allocate funds to COVID projects. And as a result, they pretty much spent the majority of their funds available for global grants. The budget was completely expended. I mean, we've had a number of COVID grants applied here in our district as well. We had a number of clubs apply for COVID grants. So we did see across the world how many clubs were doing COVID related programs. A lot of them would never have met global grant criteria because they were not long-term sustainable projects. But of course, with COVID, people needed work, they needed computers, they needed food, they needed all sorts of things immediately. So in a sort of twist of fate, what happened was the global grant criteria was suspended, and in a way it became a district grant model, but for COVID grants, and it came from the Global Grants Fund. So it's really been an extraordinary year for Rotary giving, because so much money has been reallocated to COVID related projects. So just to give you an idea of some of the global grants that we've had in our district over the years, we've had a program, neonatal. There seem to be quite a few that are related to maternal and baby health. And so you'll see that the first one is to do with women's health, mammography equipment, and actually the partner was District 7020, which is of course the Northern Caribbean. So you don't even have to go as far afield as Australia or India to get a partner. You can get one, you know, Florida, right here in the Caribbean, District 7000, 7020. Water projects have been funded, but I really want you to have a look at the dollar value of the projects, because this is in US dollars. And so you can see that $360,000 US for a Rotary project. I mean, that's an enormous amount of money. You just think what you could do in a project if you had access to that kind of funding. So the global grant projects are normally over 30,000 US, and district grant are below 30,000 US. So these are some significant projects that have lasting impact in our communities in the Caribbean. And then there are what are called scale grants, which we've not had any experience of in our district as far as I'm aware, but these are a bit more competitive. And this is essentially where you would partner, for example, with somebody like the Red Cross or Habitat for Humanity, another established NGO organization. And you may do a project that, for example, is in 6 different Caribbean countries. And the World Fund gives up to $2 million US. But this is actually a competitive program. They are for long-term projects only. It has to be run by a Rotary club or a Rotary group of Rotary clubs, but really identifying or impacting people in a wider spread. So I guess it could be the whole of Trinidad and Tobago, but if you wanted to do an education, so for example, we could have, as a district, done a regional diabetes program. You know, if every country wanted to do something similar, we could have rolled it out over a number of countries, similar type of programs to reduce diabetes numbers in children or something like that. But again, a lot of administration, a lot of bureaucracy, but you can get $2 million US. So, you know, it's sometimes worth it to put that work in because of the funding that you can get to really, truly change lives. So in order for you to be eligible for grants, just to go through some of our requirements. So for example, for both district and global, you have to have paid your dues. Obviously, the club cannot be non-financial, must be up to date with all of its dues, as well as any previous grants that you had been given, you must be up to date on your reporting. Now, global grant reporting is very, very strict. District grant is a little bit more flexible. It's not as onerous, but it is required still. But global grants, in fact, we have a situation at the moment where we have a global grant and the club, the partner club, has not reported. So the Rotary Club in Martinique is on the verge of being terminated by Rotary. So that's how serious it is. If you don't report accurately and on time how the funds have been spent with receipts and photographs and all the rest of it, they can terminate your club. So it is absolutely essential that that is done. We also require that the clubs must have given to the foundation. You know, if you've never given to the foundation and you're now applying for a grant, it is not really very fair that you've never given anything but you want money. The exceptions would be if it's a brand new club. So we did award a grant this year to a new club that just formed, but we know that they already have in the pipeline a number of Paul Harris Fellows. So that, and that's what they're going to be doing in the next month. So they've already made that pledge to give to the foundation. But it is important, we will look at a club's giving record. So over the last 3 years, have you given to the Rotary Foundation? How much have you given? You know, if you've given $20,000 to the foundation over 3 years and you want a grant for $10,000, if we have the funds, then of course. But if you've only given $1 a year for 3 years and you want $10,000, it's a little harder for us to, you know, give you that grant. We do require that a member of the club attend the district grant seminar. So this is done every year as part of our PETS and annual conference. Of course, it was all done remotely this year, but that's a mandatory requirement. And the club must then sign what is known as the Memorandum of Understanding. And this speaks to the stewardship requirements. This speaks to how the funds would be administered and so on. We do require that every club has financial statements, not necessarily audited statements, but they must have been reviewed by an auditor or prepared by a finance professional. We are a little flexible on this in the district, but for global grants, that is going to be an essential thing. So if you're thinking about a global grant, your club is going to need audited financials or some form of official financial statement. Again, alignment with the areas of focus. You have to have a foundation chair in your club, and that person must be reported and put onto the Rotary Club Central system. You must also have your goals uploaded online. As I mentioned, the MOU. Separate bank account, it's not essential for the district grant. It's ideal if you can, but it's not essential, especially if the amounts are smaller, but it is mandatory for a global grant, unfortunately. So that's something that, you know, some of our clubs are finding challenging. And then you must have 2 members of the club who are going to be project leaders so that the district or the RI reps, the foundation reps, sorry, can connect with you, reach out, get reports, updates, and so on. And as I said, a district grant is up to 30,000 US and a global grant is 30,000 US and more. So there's a certain number of things that are very easy to do to be qualified or to be eligible. And there are other things that require a little bit of work. But these are sort of minimum standards for us. We have to have a system in place. We can't just sort of be randomly giving money out all over the place. There have to be protocols, there have to be guidelines. And this is what our district has settled on. And this has been shared with the clubs over the last couple of years. Again, historically, we didn't have a lot of involvement with grants, but this has been changing over time. And as we've evolved as a district and got more and more involved in district grants and more clubs applying, you know, we've had to be a little bit more robust with our criteria. And even when you fill in the district grant application, you'll see it asks for things like how many Rotaractors are involved, how many Rotarians are involved. You know, we want to get the nitty-gritty of the project. So that enables us to understand that you've thought this through. It's not just, you know, well, I don't know, we're buying books for a library. As wonderful as that may be, you know, there needs to be a little bit more thought put into it. How is it going to be, how are they going to get them in through customs? How are we going to distribute them? Are they going to be labeled with Rotary 4-way test stickers or bookmarks? Or how is Rotaract and Interact going to be involved? So we really are pushing clubs to think through projects a little bit more deeply, again, to speak to that whole idea of sustainability. and we will ask questions. In fact, the applications I received this year, there were 3 clubs that I had to go back to the clubs and get more information about the project because the application form was not clear. There were gaps in the information, and to really also to understand how projects had been adapted because of COVID, because some people had projects that would be impossible to execute now with the COVID protocols, and that was not reflected in the application. So we had to go back and say, you know, how are you adjusting this to deal with COVID and all of the protocols related to that. So our goal for raising funds this year, this is our global goal for the Rotary Foundation, is $50 million. Of course, this was our goal before COVID. And so now I know we know that many clubs around the world have been putting a lot of effort into COVID related projects. But really what we're asking is every club to give a minimum of $1,500 US, which is not a lot of money if you think about it. And of course you could do that through fundraising activities, through member giving, through tin collections, whatever projects you have to raise money for the foundation. But the point is to understand that if you as a Rotaract club or Rotaract clubs, either through your Rotary Club or independently give to the foundation, you can get it back in grant funding in 3 years' time. So every year you give, then once you're on that sort of, what's the word? Not roller coaster. In that cycle, then you are now eligible to receive grants funding. Now, I don't know whether, maybe you guys know this, whether Rotaract clubs are going to be eligible to apply directly or whether you have to go through a Rotary Club. I haven't heard or seen anything that guides me one way or the other, but either way, it's important as a Rotaract club to give to the foundation and to track it and to keep a note of it so that you can see then where your money is and you can then apply for funding in 3 years' time. As I say, it's actually matched from the World Fund, so we get it back from Rotary Foundation. So that is the end of my presentation. I'm going to stop sharing. I will, oh, I've got a message there. I will email the slides to you guys so you can have access to them afterwards, but how long was that? 40 minutes. Okay, so happy to take any questions that you might have. No?
Anyone has any questions they would like to pose to Laura? I just have one thing that I want you to clear up for me. Seeing as from, okay, so a lot of clubs have not been really donated to the foundation.
Right.
But to be allowed to apply for grants from next year. But as you were speaking, I kept hearing you saying in 3 years' time. So is it that we, even though we're allowed to apply for grants from next year, we still have to wait that 3 years' time before we actually receive these grants?
No, I expect if they've said that you can start applying from next year, then you should start giving this year, because we will check and see whether you've given anything in this year as we get ready for that. But if that's what's been agreed, then you don't have to. What the 3 years is that next year the district grants chair will be able to access from the 3 years ago pool, which you would not have been included in, right? So whatever Rotary clubs gave 3 years ago is what would be, you would now be eligible for a piece of. However, even this year, when we were looking at grants for this year, we looked at what clubs gave last year. So we don't only look at what you gave 3 years ago, because you might be a new club, you might be, as you said, a new Rotaract club coming into this. But what we do want to see is that you've given something.
Yeah.
So if you didn't give anything at all in 2020, 2021, and then next year, July 1st, 2021, you hop up and say, right, we need $20,000 for a, I don't know, project in Penal, we're going to go, well, you didn't give a single dollar to the foundation last year. So nice try. But, you know, that said, I know that there'll be a certain amount of flexibility with Rotaract. You may not get, and again, if a club applies for, let's say, $20,000, and we do get these applications, up to 30 grand you're allowed to apply for. We have to look at all of the applications we've received versus the total amount we have to spend versus what clubs have given. And then we decide whether or not we're going to give a club anything at all. and B, what that amount would be. So there are clubs who applied to us for $20,000 who we may only give $5,000 to.
Okay.
So it doesn't mean that you won't get a grant at all, but you might not get the full amount that you've applied for. So
Right.
again, there is some, so that we would then expect you to go and do other fundraising and so on. But the point I would say to you is that you should really try and put something in the pot this year, so that when we start looking next year, I'm sure we'll get some Rotaract applications. At least we can say, okay, well, you know, they've made that commitment. And don't forget, you have to go on Rotary Club Central and upload your goals. I'm assuming Rotaract clubs can do that, yes?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't actually know, but I would assume so. So you have to have a foundation chair, put some money in, set a goal. So if you have 15 members, 1,500 US, right? Try and get 100 US per person, whether they give it themselves or you have a fundraiser or sell tickets for something, or, you know, have a raffle. But I would suggest to you, put some money in the pot now, because that will stand you in good stead for next year.
Okay.
Yeah.
No problem. We have a question from Colleen. She wants to know, what about global grants or postgraduate studies?
Okay, so global grants are not usually used for scholarships, because bear in mind, a global grant is a lot of money, and it is meant to therefore impact as many people as possible, an entire village, an entire school, an entire hospital. So for Rotary Foundation to award $30,000, $40,000 US to a single individual is highly unlikely, unless you, I don't know, maybe we're a Nobel Peace Prize winner and you were going to go into the Middle East and eradicate violence in the Middle East or something. So yeah, I think that's highly unlikely. That, and in fact, I do have, I can send it to you again, but I do have the guidelines of the things that they will and they won't fund. For example, one of the things that Rotary's never funded is buildings. I'm not really sure why. I don't know the history of that, but if you wanted to build, you know, a maternity ward, or you wanted to build a fishing hut for a village, they will not fund that. They'll buy the nets, they'll buy the boats, they'll do all the other stuff, but they will not fund the building. I don't know why, but I know that that's one of the rules. So to answer your question, Colleen, that's highly unlikely that they would spend all that money on impacting one person. But even if you were to look to Rotary for funding for academic studies, again, it would have to be something that was in line with the 7 areas of focus. So you couldn't, for example, I don't know, do a degree in marketing, you know, unless you're able to convince your sponsoring Rotary Club that somehow that's going to come back and you're going to, you know, eradicate gang violence in East Port of Spain. It's going to have to be something around what we try and do as Rotary clubs and Rotaract clubs: peace building, maternal health, you know, economic development, those things. We've had a number of people ask us for grants. Of course, there's the Peace Scholarship, so that's a separate thing. So you could look at applying, but in fact, although I don't think Rotaractors are eligible for Peace Scholarships, sorry, Rotarians are not either. One of the resolutions on the Council on Resolutions this year was to actually remove that criteria that Rotaractors and Rotarians are not eligible for Peace Scholarships. But again, that's still to go to the vote. So yeah, I think my answer to you would be no on that particular thing for a global grant. They wouldn't give 35, 40,000 US dollars for one person to benefit. Kivan asked a question about how many grant applications we get on average each year. So this year we received 9. So think about it. We have 72 Rotary clubs. We got 9 applications. When I was district grants chair 3 years ago, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, we had maybe 12 off the top of my head. So yeah, I'm always baffled at why clubs don't apply, because even if you get $5,000, it's better than, you know, poking the eye with a sharp stick, and it's money that you've already invested. So you're really just taking out from money that you've already given. It's a return on your investment, as it were. And some of our clubs do actually get, as I say, you can get up to 30,000 US. So some of the clubs have been given significant grants. And so I'm always quite sad at how few applied, but then of course it works in the favor of those who did apply, because they then get a slightly larger slice of the pie. But yeah, we had 9 this year. I'm sure once Rotaractors get on the bandwagon, we'll get hundreds from Rotaract clubs. I have no doubt the Rotaractors are going to be very keen to get this money, but okay, so what is the main reason that clubs in our district don't apply for global grants, Giselle? I think honestly, Giselle, it's the administration and bureaucracy, the amount, because you have to have an international partner. So even just applying for a global grant, everybody, so you have to have 2 stewards from your club, 2 stewards from the Rotary Club, the partner club, district stewards, and then TRF stewards. And they all have to go on and sign and approve. And then the reporting, there are very strict reporting timelines and reporting guidelines. And everybody has to report. So what often happens, and we've seen it in our district, is that one club will be doing all the right things and doing the work and another club won't. Maybe they changed president, maybe the president left, or they lost interest in the project or whatever. And so it affects the whole arrangement. And in fact, what can happen if a global grant is not managed properly, reported on properly, funds accounted for properly, the entire district can lose its ability to award grants in the following year. So one global grant screw up, if you wish, and as I said to you, we're having problems at the moment with a club, because essentially, even though the foundation is managing it, it's a district responsibility to make sure that our clubs do the right thing. So the district governor, myself, PDG Milton, we are all currently in conversations with these clubs, the one in Europe as well as the one here, to try and get them to finish up their reporting, because the Rotary Club in our district could be terminated. And a lot of it has just been that there are so many partners. It's not like a district grant where, you know, Giselle, you are very responsible and reliable. If I ask you for a report, I'll probably get it today. You sit down, you do it, it's done. That's not how global grants work. You do your piece, I have to do my piece, Dexter's got to do a bit, Ariana's got to do a bit, and then Dara's got to sign off. So, you know, that's why things get stuck, right? As we all know, team projects, you know, 5 of us do the work, 10 of us get the grade. So it's that kind of, my understanding of global grants is that's often where it's not the project, it's not even necessarily getting the money in and out of the foundation to the, it's that reporting that is where things get stuck. And the Rotary Foundation is very strict. If you screw up this once, that's it. They probably would never give your club a global grant again. So that's my understanding of where we have some of these pitfalls. So, but I mean, if you wanted to apply for a global grant, Giselle, you're very welcome to go and have a look at it. I can send you the guidelines. I mean, it's all on the Grant Centre on the Rotary website. And we would like clubs to apply because there is funding available, but you have to be committed to the management of the project, the reporting and so on, for, I would say, for at least 3 years, because the cycles are generally longer. Even though it's an annual giving cycle, the cycle of the project would be longer. So we have global grants now that were approved, you know, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, that are still being executed. Yeah. Okay, Atia said, no, we can't. Oh, is that about the postgrad studies?
I think that was with uploading our goals. If Rotaract is fake.
Ah, okay. Okay.
They can't as yet. I think it's in the pipeline.
Yeah.
It will be something to come on board later on.
Well, it should be, because again, that's a requirement for Rotary clubs, and we want to align the two things as closely as possible. And in fact, again, one of the resolutions that they have proposed this year, I'm our district representative on the council on resolutions, and one of the resolutions was around the Rotaract Rotary relationship, because I know now we've got, you know, you guys can be members of both, but there's a lot of confusion. It's open to interpretation, and some Rotaractors feel like now that they're in Rotaract, they're automatically a Rotarian, and some Rotary clubs don't know what to do with it. So there's been a lot of, I would say, a lack of clarity around some of these things, and there's a call for more clarity, including around funding and grants, because if Rotaract and Rotary clubs are to be equal in that sense, I'm not saying that they're not equal, but you know what I mean, in terms of funding and so on, because we don't expect, for example, for Rotaract clubs to give as much as Rotary clubs do to the foundation. So where we might be able to give $1,000 a year, you might only be able to give $100 a year, let's say. So then should you be eligible for the same size grants as a Rotary club? So there is still to my knowledge, a little bit of lack of clarity around some of those things, but I guess they'll figure that out as we go along. And of course, if you guys have any questions about any of those things as we go along, ask me and I'll try and get the answers. I don't have them yet, but I'll certainly try and get them for you. But what I will say to you is start thinking about giving now. So, you know, because you haven't been meeting in person, because you haven't had fines, maybe every Rotaractor in lieu of fines could, you know, put $100 in a kitty at Christmas and you give a little something to the foundation. Just start to, you know, build up your giving, because at least then you've got that to fall back on next year. And Kivan, you can of course say the same to all the clubs in the district, right? Encourage them to start giving. I mean, I give on my credit card 1st of July every year, it's automatically done, but I know that's not possible for everybody. But set up a system, you know, every 4th meeting that you have, the fines collected go to the foundation or whatever. You just start to make it part of your regular fundraising. Okay, and of course, bear in mind though, the money that you give, this is not money that you give to Polio Plus. So if you raise $100 as a club, you give $50 to the annual fund and $50 to Polio Plus, or however you wish to split it. Polio Plus money goes to polio, right? That's not coming back to you as a grant. It is the money you give to the annual fund, which is where your grant money comes from. Good, so you could still have a polio event, but that's for very specific polio activities. So just to be clear that you wouldn't get money back from Polio Plus. Okay.
Do we have any more questions, guys?
Any more questions from anyone? No? Well, we'll hand it over to Samantha.
Okay, so firstly, PDG Lara, thank you so much for graciously accepting our invitation to share your knowledge on grants and giving up your nap time.
Yeah.
We would have gained a greater appreciation and understanding for the difference between, well, Rotary Foundation and Rotary International, the source of the funds, the 3-year cycle, the difference between a district versus a global versus a scale grant, as well as the eligibility criteria. Thank you lastly to everyone who helped make the session possible. So President Giselle, President Renee, Secretary Colleen, of course, Sean Paddy, the District Communications Officer, and the District Public Image Chair. And well, thank you everybody for joining as well and you know, being interactive and asking your questions and that sort of thing, right? You really made the session an enjoyable one. So thanks.
All right. Thank you all very much indeed. So remember to stay safe. If you're going trick-or-treating, you could collect money tonight for the foundation. There you go, with your pumpkin basket, right? Dress up as a coronavirus and go and collect money for the foundation.
And before we close off the call, we just wanted to give a reminder for an upcoming foundation session that the Rotary Club of Piaco is doing jointly with the Rotaract Club of Piaco UV, and we have our DRR Kivan here, and that topic is going to be on Rotary Opens Opportunities through the Rotary Foundation, and it will be done by PDG Milton, who's also the District Foundation Chair, and that is this Saturday, so Saturday the 7th of November at 1 p.m. So if you need reinforcement or any other bits of information, it's a great follow-up session certainly for Rotaractors to attend. Okay, so I think on that note, we're wishing everyone a great afternoon. Thank you again, PDG Lara. It's always a pleasure. And I'm so proud of our Rotaractors pulling this together. Very well done, guys. And have a great afternoon.
Splendid. All right, folks, stay safe. See you all soon. Bye.
Bye.